I won't keep you holding your breath in anticipation. This movie blows. And I'm not alone in that opinion. Most Jason fans rank Jason Goes to Hell: The Final Friday as the worst of the series, and if not, it usually comes in second place, just behind Jason X. But at least Jason X is reasonably fun to watch, and the Jason design was pretty solid, at least until he turned into Utrom Robocop at the end. One of the biggest complaints about Jason Goes to Hell: The Final Installment is Jason's design, second only in terribleness to what they do to his lore. But unlike Jason X, which gave us a decent Jason for most of it, and then a seriously weird departure in the last act, this movie gives us a terrible Jason design in the first 2 minutes and last 2 minutes, and for the rest of the movie, there's about as much Jason as there is Michael Myers in Halloween 3. Now, if you were involved in the late 2010s hot-button political issue that was Star Wars discourse, you may think that hiring back the original creator of a film franchise would be better than letting anyone else take over. But just like Attack of the Clones and George Lucas's pitch for an Inside-Out style Star Wars movie about midichlorians, Jason Goes to Hell proves that this isn't always the case. It was produced by Sean S. Cunningham, creator of Friday the 13th, and as any fan of the franchise knows, Cunningham hates Jason Voorhees like Joss Whedon hates women with sexual autonomy. I love Jason and all of the sequels, but I kind of get where he's coming from. It's kind of like if they did a bunch of Kill Bill sequels where the bride's daughter is the main character, and they said that she was trained from birth by her mother, and they didn't acknowledge that she thought she was dead in the first movie. Jason was supposed to be like the spirit of the lake, like in urban legend that's exacerbated by the whole Friday the 13th motif. What's really baffling, though, is that when Cunningham returned to the franchise and signed on to Jason Goes to Hell, he completely undermined everything we knew about Jason, instead of just getting back to basics. In Jason Goes to Hell, Jason graduates from a hulking, undead serial killer to a straight-up demonic, body-swapping, incestuous, black sludge-filled, sentient heart lizard fetus thing, and, spoiler alert, except it's in the title of the movie, it ends with Jason literally being dragged to hell by a bunch of demons. I'll elaborate on this later, but one of the craziest parts about all of this is that the director reached into a totally unrelated franchise he didn't have the rights to explain Jason's backstory. Cunningham's first idea, when the Cenobite hooks of New Line Cinema dragged him back into the sadomasochistic hell of double-digit sequels, was a new Freddy Krueger movie where he would battle Jason Voorhees, and unlike Sadako vs. Kayako, it wasn't just an April Fool's joke that got out of hand. And if it was, Cunningham was not in on the joke. New Line got the rights to Jason Voorhees, but not to the Friday the 13th title, which feels kind of backhanded towards Cunningham. I don't really know where the guy's head was at, but Jason Goes to Hell and Freddy vs. Jason both feel like the exact movies you wouldn't make if you wanted to drop Jason as a marketable monster slasher and go back to the spooky, ethereal, surface-level lynchiness of the original movie. Okay, I have to say for the record, as a huge Twin Peaks fan, when I say Friday the 13th is Lynchian, I basically just mean it's set in the woods and there's a lake. None of that esoteric stuff. Like how Godzilla is Lovecraftian, because Lovecraftian means giant monsters. Before Cunningham could start working on Freddy vs. Jason, he had to sit back and watch New Line Cinema make the most unwatchable Nightmare on Elm Street movie, Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, which, spoiler alert, except it's in the title, ends with Freddy being dead. Actually, it ends with the person who just killed Freddy smugly saying, "Freddy's dead," almost directly into the camera. Which, I think as a society, we should start using as shorthand for, well, that just happened. Obviously, Cunningham believed that reports of Freddy's being dead were greatly exaggerated, and he kept pushing to make Freddy vs. Jason. But New Line decided to humor Wes Craven and make the unholy love child of Nightmare on Elm Street and The Dark Tower Book 6, that is, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. This movie was pretty much the beginning of the whole meta-horror trend that we still haven't escaped after 30 years, to the point where it could have easily been called Wes Craven's metafictional reimagining of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Obviously, that movie was set in a different continuity, but it stalled Freddy vs. Jason even further, so Cunningham decided the only option was to make a placeholder Jason movie, which he figured might as well just be the exact same movie as Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. I mean, it was literally called Jason Goes to Hell: The Final Friday. It's like if Iron Man 2 was called Iron Man Suits Up: The Dawn of the Iron Legion. Then before the Avengers came out, they came up with Thor grabs his hammer, the dawn of the Thor Corps. I guess I should say that before Freddy vs. Jason, they also made Jason X, which, much like Jason Goes to Hell, was a really crappy movie, but unlike Jason Goes to Hell, didn't make any money, so New Line thought they might as well let Cunningham do his crossover movie. It fits that Cunningham is Celtic for failing upwards. Anyways, Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Straw dropped in 1993, which was actually before Wes Craven's New Nightmare, probably because Wes Craven selfishly insisted they have a workable script before they started shooting. The movie was directed by Adam Marcus and produced by Cunningham, and legend says he told Marcus to, quote, "Get rid of that fucking mask." So I guess it was less Jason he objected to, and more Jason's marketability. He also decided to ignore the last movie, Jason Takes Manhattan, which is pretty disappointing, since for all their loose continuity, the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street movies usually pick up where the last one left off. Not that there's really anywhere you can go from having your body melted off by thousands of gallons of New York City sewage and revealing your literal inner child like a low-budget PG-13 version of that one Junji Ito story that had me sleeping with the lights on at age 23. Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Nail in the Coffin starts in a surprisingly familiar scenario. An attractive young woman shows up at Camp Crystal Lake, the electricity goes out, and right after she's gotten naked, Jason shows up to give her the old slasheroo. Enjoy the scene while you can, not just because of the boobs, but because it's the closest thing in the whole movie to the whole vibe and general point of Friday the 13th 2 through 7. Also, I'm not alone in thinking this is visually the worst Jason Voorhees of the whole series. Despite being played by everyone's favorite Jason actor, Kane Hodder, he looks more like an unfaithful parody you might see in one of the Scary Movie sequels. His head is mutated and scarred to shit, and his mask is tiny and broken. His whole head looks like a big toe with an ingrown toenail. Yeah, Jason always had physical disabilities and literal brain rot, but he wasn't supposed to look like Ben Grimm after Samuel Tarly gave him a rockerectomy. Also, he wears coveralls in this, which makes me wonder if Sean S. Cunningham was confused about the difference between Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers, which actually brings everything full circle, since the original Friday the 13th was a Since the original Friday the 13th was a pretty blatant ripoff of the original Halloween. Jason chases the naked lady around the camp for a while, but she pulls the old switcheroo on him, and we see that she's actually a Fed luring Jason into a trap. A bunch of FBI guys appear out of nowhere and absolutely lay into Jason with machine guns before finally blowing him up. Honestly, I don't hate this opening scene, because I feel like after 24 years and dozens of murders, the cops would stop pretending Jason isn't a threat and actually get serious about taking him down. The government doesn't have to acknowledge the existence of revenant slashers as long as they do something about them. That's actually a plotline in the comic book series Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, which I highly recommend, by the way. It's basically a perfect wrap-up to all three series, and it's one of the few good things to come out of this movie. Anyways, they take Jason in for an autopsy, and the scene keeps getting interrupted by credits, because tension, I guess. Apparently the least human-looking Jason design is the only one still made of living flesh and blood, but his heart is enlarged and deformed, and the doctor decides to take a big ol' bite out of it. I'm not kidding. The doctor eats Jason's heart for no apparent reason, and this makes a bunch of New Line Cinema brand MS Paint sparks shoot out of Jason's body and into the doctor. And now the doctor is possessed by Jason Voorhees. Because that is the plot of this movie. Sean S. Cunningham thought it was too complicated for Jason to be an undead serial killer, so instead he made him the most ridiculous ripoff of The Thing ever. And yes, I am including Among Us in that list. Also, the doctor's reflection is Jason, which doesn't make any sense, and it's not just a background detail. Someone actually sees it later, but I guess they can only see it when it's plot relevant. So Dr. Jason kills 2 security guards and another doctor who uses the phrase big ol' mango-sized crap to refer to the size and shape of the defecation he plans on depositing on Jason's corpse. This is not plot relevant. I was just kind of in shock when I heard this line, and I had to repeat it for you. And I also don't blame Jason for going out of his way to kill that guy. We then meet Creighton Duke, a bounty hunter who considers Jason his white whale. If you couldn't tell from his name, his clothes, or the fact that he's a modern-day bounty hunter without a reality show, Duke is the most ridiculous character, maybe in the entire series. And this is the series that made a sweater-wearing grandmother line cook into an epic twist killer. Duke is so over the top, from his cowboy hat and trench coat to his cigars to his non sequitur dialogue.
That makes me think of a little girl in a pink dress sticking a hot dog through a donut.
I just can't take him seriously. He's not funny enough to be funny, and he's not serious enough to feel like a threat to Jason. And that's the worst part. He's set up as Jason's big arch nemesis, since Paramount also forgot to sell Tommy Jarvis to New Line, but he's not even a legacy character. He's not even implied to have any kind of history with him. In 2017, Adam Marcus gave Duke a whole backstory where he was out on Crystal Lake and Jason killed his girlfriend, but not him, I guess, and Duke swore revenge. As far as I know, that wasn't a deleted scene. Marcus just forgot to give Duke a motivation for 30 years. We meet Duke on a news show hosted by the live-action version of the 80s business guy from Futurama. This guy further muddles the lore of Jason's backstory by saying he was
believed to have drowned in Camp Crystal Lake at the tender age of 11. Sadly, he did not.
Which, I get he's a serial killer, but damn. Creighton Duke swears he'll kill Jason for good and drops an exposition bomb on the audience, including his deep understanding of the Jason lore that literally didn't exist before this movie. Maybe you could read this as some kind of Twin Peaks Season 3 4D chess commenting on the fluctuating mythology of long-running franchises by speaking Jason's backstory into existence through the mouth of a character birthed from the creator's desire to erase everything we know about Jason. But I almost feel like, and don't get too mad at me here, I almost feel like they didn't think that deeply about it. So part of the Jason lore we're making up out of nowhere is that only a blood relative can kill him, which was also the case in Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, which, again, was the same movie. Luckily, Jason's only blood relative was Pam, who died way back in the first movie, which was either 14 or 24 years ago, depending on which airtight fan timeline you're going with. Except not, because along with all the new lore, this movie also gives Jason a half-sister named Diana, who lives right here in Crystal Lake. Just like Freddy's Dead gave Freddy a daughter who lived right there in Springwood. Side note, I don't know when we decided the whole town was named Crystal Lake, and not just the lake, but in Part 6 it was established that the town was renamed Forest Green. This has now been ignored. Diana is probably the daughter of Jason's dad Elias and some other woman.
My only child.
But either way, they expect us to believe she's been living quietly in the same town where her brother committed a bloody killing spree across a decade and a half, and or 2.5 decades. Anyways, Duke shows up at Diana's diner and tries to get her help dealing with Jason, but when that doesn't work, he starts bragging to her cop boyfriend about hypothetical sexual encounters between the two of them, like Clubber Lang and Adrian. Considering this is a small town in bumfuck America, Duke is pretty lucky that the only thing that happens to him is he gets taken downtown and thrown in a holding cell. That night, a few teens go to Camp Crystal Lake, and they're bragging about how they're going to smoke weed and have premarital sex, as if they're aware they're in a slasher movie, and that slashers are a metaphor for the necessity of chastity. I blame Wes Craven, and I blame John Carpenter. But in a very real sense, I blame James Joyce. Of course, the kids immediately get offed by Dr. Jason, who is apparently still super strong, even though he's in the body of just some guy. Dr. Jason then kills this woman by tapping her on the head with a car door, and then he kidnaps her boyfriend, who is a deputy, and takes him back to his mansion. Because yes, Jason Voorhees has a mansion, and no, it is not where Diana lives. It's abandoned, and it was never mentioned. Gotta wonder why Pamela was working as a cook at a summer camp. So Jason ties up the deputy and starts shaving him in a moderately erotic manner, because Jason wants to transfer his soul into this guy. And we actually see later in the movie that being naked and shaved are not actually necessary for the soul transfer. I guess Jason is just into that humiliation thing. After the soul transfer, Deputy Jason goes to Diana's house, and she realizes that he's Jason because of his reflection in the mirror. Because mirrors are windows to the eyeballs. Diana is rescued by Steven, who is her daughter's absent baby daddy, and he's just like... Remember that time when George got a toupee in Seinfeld? Yeah. Steven goes toe-to-toe with Deputy Jason, but he can't prevent him from killing Diana. And of course, as soon as Steven is alone with Diana's body, that's when Diana's sheriff boyfriend walks in. So Steven is also taken downtown, where he meets Creighton Duke. Duke tells Steven he has important information for him, but he'll only give it to him if he lets him break his fingers. Unsurprisingly, Duke is not given any motivation for wanting to break Steven's fingers. I think the writers just thought it would be super quirky and in character if he was like a psycho sadist, but only for one scene. Honestly, I'm starting to think Creighton Duke walked so Deadpool could run. Duke explains that now that Diana is dead, the only people who can kill Jason are Diana's daughter Jessica, or Steven and Jessica's daughter, who is a baby, so probably will not be doing much slashing in the near future. Steven uses his broken fingers to lure the guard in long enough to knock him out and escape, and I guess this was supposed to be Duke's big plan from the beginning, except at no point during the escape does Steven ever have to actually prove to the cop that his fingers are really broken. Steven goes to the Voorhees mansion, which I guess must be a tourist trap, because everyone knows where it is. So Steven is basically the main character now, even though he's kind of useless. I mean, he's a departure from the franchise standard of the nerdy virgin girl who's also supermodel hot, but he also doesn't have much of a personality or chemistry with anyone. Turns out New Line Cinema actually blew all of their character development budget on Creighton Duke's Stetson and cigars. So Steven goes to the Voorhees mansion, where he finds the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead movies. And this isn't just a fun cameo. This is actually Adam Marcus's way of shoehorning in his personal fan theory that Friday the 13th is connected to the Evil Dead. It was also in 2017 that Marcus said that Pam Voorhees, quote, made a deal with the devil by reading from the Necronomicon to bring back her son. That's why Jason isn't Jason. He's Jason plus the Evil Dead. And now I can believe that he can go from being a little boy that lives in a lake to a full-grown man in a couple months to zombie Jason to never being able to kill this guy. Apparently Sam Raimi okayed this, but no word if Sean S. Cunningham agreed with it. My problem with this theory is that Marcus assumes that Jason was real at the end of the first movie, that he was actually a little boy who hadn't aged in 20 years, and he lived in the lake, and he attacked Alice and then just let her go. No matter what your theory is on how the first two movies fit together, the problem is that Pam was killing to avenge Jason, and then Jason is just straight up alive in the second movie, and he's now avenging Pam. If you go with Marcus's theory, it could be that Pam resurrected Jason after he drowned originally, but since Jason was technically a deadite and not his original soul, she felt like he still needed to be avenged. Or maybe Pam's death was the last step necessary to appease the Dark Ones from the Evil Dead and resurrect Jason, which is why he appears at the end of the first movie. The continuity with Pam and Jason and who's avenging who is famously complicated, and I don't know why they felt the need to stick Pam's death into the reboot, but either way, I really don't like the idea that Jason is just a deadite. Combining his backstory with the Evil Dead is perfectly fine, and it actually led to Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, which I absolutely love, but Jason has to be something unique. Marcus explicitly said Jason is a deadite, which is like, whatever. I appreciate that Marcus actually displayed some knowledge of past sequels, and connecting the lore to the lore of another beloved horror movie franchise is better than saying that everything happened because of a few CGI sperm demons. And either of those is better than Leatherface being paid off by the Illuminati. Not to keep complaining, but I got Creighton Duke's backstory and the Evil Dead theory from the Wikipedia page for this movie because it has an entire tab dedicated to its retcons, like how Jason was gay from the beginning and gay slashers look just like straight slashers, or how Jason Voorhees used to leave big ol' mango-sized craps all over Crystal Lake and clean them up with magic. That part was a J.K. Rowling joke, obviously, but it's kind of not a good look for a movie's Wikipedia page to have a whole list of stuff that was supposed to be included that the director told us about 30 years ago. By the way, since I live in constant fear that the people I talk about on my channel will somehow see the videos and think I'm being a dick, I looked up Adam Marcus to see if he made anything else I liked so I could kind of even it out. Unfortunately, the only other movie of his I recognized was Texas Chainsaw 3D, which he wrote. I don't remember a whole lot about that movie, but the main thing I remember is that Alexandra Daddario's character was supposed to be in her 20s, even though the movie was set in 2012, and she was born in 1973. Anyways, the douchey TV guy, who also happens to be Diana's daughter's boyfriend, shows up at the Voorhees mansion and starts monologuing about his evil plan into his cell phone. And this guy is not just cartoonishly douchey, he's straight up cartoonishly evil, because his plan involves stealing Diana's corpse from the morgue and then using it to stage a Jason killing, even though he doesn't believe in Jason. And when he's talking to this guy on the phone, he's got this whole thing where he's like, I went to the morgue and I stole Diana's corpse, and then I went home and fucked her daughter. And it's like, why? Why are you evil? Do you have a vendetta against Diana and her daughter? It's not because they're Voorheeses, because he doesn't believe in Jason. Yeah, so Steven is just sitting there listening to the guy who stole his girl brag about his evil plan, and then Cop Jason shows up and transfers his soul into the evil boyfriend, at which point his cop body just kind of melts. This is why one reviewer, when the movie came out, said that the lore was more confusing than Days of Our Lives on Fast Forward. And if I could add to that decades-old review, I would say that the acting and the melodrama are also pretty much up to soap opera standards. Steven is still hiding out when Diana's corpse does a jump scare on him, because apparently the boyfriend really did steal her from the morgue and prop her up in there. I guess if you slip the morgue attendant $20, he'll let you do anything.
I'll give you guys the same deal I give everyone else. $50 gets you 10 minutes alone with the bodies.
What are you talking about?
Jessica arrives at the Voorhees mansion because the script told her to, and she gets attacked by her possessed boyfriend. Steven rescues her and runs over a mannequin with his car, and then boyfriend Jason walks off to defund the police. Jessica tricks Steven and leaves him on the side of the road, which I really appreciate, because from her point of view, she just found her ex-boyfriend creeping around her grandma's empty house and then watched him kill her current boyfriend. The cop who Steven had to knock out finds him, and they have a little scuffle. And then we have one of the few actually likable character moments in the movie.
Get in the fucking car, Steven. You get in the car. You want me to cuff you? What makes you think you can? I got a gun. Fuck that. I got a gun.
Side note, apparently this movie is set in Cunningham County, which is obviously a reference to Sean S. Cunningham, who created the franchise, but that feels like the kind of tribute you would do when the original creator was dead, or at least not actively working on this current movie. The older movies are set in the fictional Wessex County, New Jersey, and I guess when the town went from Crystal Lake to Forest Green, the county went from Crystal Lake County to Forest Green County. And then when the town went back to Crystal Lake, the county became Cunningham County. For whatever reason. This is just based on fan forums I found recently, but some people think the canonical reason why the town went back to being Crystal Lake is that they were trying to capitalize off of the Jason killings to bring tourists into their town. And that actually does fit with the diner characters in this movie, who I have completely not mentioned yet, even though I probably should have. They're pretty funny. They make hockey mask-shaped burgers. It's a laugh. It's a riot. It's a laugh riot. So Jessica is at the police station where boyfriend Jason is going around killing people, and I gotta say, this actor is pretty good at playing Jason. He's no Kane Hodder, but he's definitely better than the doctor and definitely better than the deputy. He's got the whole lumbering Terminator thing down and the whole arm swinging, getting shot by bullets thing. Steven lets the cop take him downtown because apparently he has a whole plan to rescue Jessica, which includes doing this little handcuffs under the feet jumpy thing, which he must have practiced for a long time to avoid dislocating his shoulders or ripping his hands clean off. Boyfriend Jason kills a couple of the cops with a Three Stooges head bonk, which causes their faces to be totally covered in blood and guts for some reason. Everyone ends up back at Diana's diner, where Jason kills this guy Ward, who's only on screen for like 30 seconds, but he single-handedly brings up the likability average for the whole cast. Ward bonks into the door, and this waitress briefly forgets how to scream. The kill effects in this movie are pretty awful, like rubber skin and red paint blood levels of awful, but all the body horror stuff involving Jason's original body is actually pretty neat. Kind of like a Hellraiser on a budget. Boyfriend Jason kills everyone at the diner besides Jessica and Steven, and these kills are pretty sweet. You got one guy getting dunked in fried oil, foreshadowing when Jason will dunk someone's face in a cryogenic freezing pod and break it off. And you got a lady getting sucker punched so hard that her teeth get knocked in, which is also a pretty cool makeup effect. Jason actually doesn't kill anyone in this movie with a machete, which I feel like you gotta have one in every movie. But then again, Jason is not really in this movie. I don't know what it is about this diner scene, but it suddenly feels like they're trying to rip off Terminator. Jessica gets a whole dramatic ponytail moment, and suddenly she looks and acts like Sarah Connor in T2, even though for most of the movie she's been more like Sarah Connor in T1, and Steven has been like, I don't know, not Kyle Reese. He's like a dog that follows her around, I guess. Steven's like the kid from the end of Terminator who takes a picture of Sarah if he was being forced by the movie to be the hero. Oh, speaking of Sarah Connor, Jessica and Steven's baby has actually been here the whole time, and I just totally did not mention her, but she has been kind of a living MacGuffin, and Creighton Duke has now kidnapped the baby, because that's the kind of thing Creighton Duke does. He's unpredictable. Woo! Never know where he's going to go next. Woo! So Creighton Duke left a note for them saying he kidnapped the baby, and the text of the note changes between the two scenes, and also we get a full Creighton Duke voiceover reading the note, because I guess they figured if you haven't left the theater by now, then reading probably isn't your strong suit. Jessica and Steven head over to Club Voorhees, but not before Steven finds a machete, because you know what Anton Chekhov said. If in the first act of your story, a putsy-looking guy picks up a machete, then by the third act of your story, you should not, under any circumstances, let Jason Voorhees use that machete, ever. Jessica and Steven meet up with Duke and the baby, and Duke explains that Jessica's the only one who can kill Jason. Duke then throws a Swiss Army knife at her, and it turns into this magical dagger that Adam Marcus definitely wanted to be the Kandarian dagger from The Evil Dead, but he couldn't because of copyright reasons. Consider this. There are two police officers in front of you. One of them only lies. The other one also only lies. What question do you ask to determine which one of them is possessed by an undead serial killer? Incorrect. You don't ask anything. You wait for the police officer who is not possessed to attack you, and then you stab him, and then you do nothing as the police officer who is possessed grabs your baby. Also, Jason talks. Not in his own body, but, like, isn't that friggin' weird? All he's allowed to say is mommy and ki, ma. He couldn't even talk before he was undead in the second, third, and fourth movies. But maybe this is evidence for Marcus's theory that Jason was already paranormal in the first 4 movies. It would definitely explain why he was so unkillable even after getting an axe to the head, and why a normal-ass lightning bolt was able to bring him back to life. I don't really have a problem with Jason being paranormal from the beginning. I actually used to have this whole theory where he was actually the unseen killer from the first movie, and that he was working for Pam, who was trying to avenge him because he did die and then come back to life. Because, I mean, the killer in the first one throws someone through a window and does all this other crazy shit that a 60-year-old woman would probably not be able to do. At least not without today's sponsor, Jason Voorhees brand protein powder. I'm kidding. But whether or not Jason was paranormal from the beginning, I do think at the end of the first movie, when he jumps out of the lake, that should have been a hallucination of Alice, or at least it should have been ambiguous. Steven decapitates cop Jason, and this is when things get even weirder. And not in a good way. Jason's heart crawls out of the cop's body. And yes, I mean crawls, because it has legs now. Jason's heart has become some kind of chest burster, lizard, alien fetus thing that just like crawls around and tries to slither inside people. Even if this fit with anything we knew about Jason Voorhees, why was the heart in the cop? We saw that Jason's soul transfer was just kind of regurgitating black goop into people's mouths, but like, is the goop like gestating inside them and becoming this creature? Because if it is, then like, why did it only do that in the cop? The cop was possessed for the least amount of time of any of them. Did the heart become this creature and then liquefy again every time it's time to transfer the soul? Doesn't matter. Nothing in this movie is even internally consistent, let alone fitting with the previous 8 installments. Anyways, this little mongrel heart Pokemon thing attacks Steven like the rabbit from Monty Python, and then it crawls into Diana's corpse's vagina. And that is not me extrapolating on what I think happened off camera. That is literally what happened. Jason Voorhees wanted to be reborn, so his sentient heart with legs crawled into the uterus of his dead sister. It would almost be disturbing in like a less subtle Rosemary's Baby type way if it wasn't so fucking stupid. And apparently this whole magic rebirth thing has nothing to do with actual birth. It's not like Diana gives birth to a baby and then it grows up to be Jason. No, Jason appears fully formed in his original body. And now that we know that Jason can be reborn from a dead relative, why didn't he just kill Jessica? He definitely had chances to. He just seemed to want to kidnap her instead. The one thing they could have done to make this rebirth scene as awesome as the writers seemed to think it was to give Jason a new design. Like, if he's just been reborn, why does he look as fucked up as he did for the whole movie? Where are those beautiful red locks from part 2 or the classy cue ball look from part 3? If the reason Jason looks so fucked up in this movie is that they wanted to show that the last movies have had a big effect on him, that he hasn't come away unscathed and his body's about to give out, then I could appreciate his design more. But the problem is, he still looks like that after he comes back to life. Wouldn't they want him to look like how he looked before he was killed, like in part 3? Or at least like how he looked when he first came back to life in part 6. Jason easily kills Duke, who, as I mentioned, fell into the basement for absolutely no reason. And I gotta admit, his death seems pretty anticlimactic, given that they've been mortal enemies for an entire hour and a half now. Jason beats the shit out of Steven, and Steven is fine, despite Spider-Man levels of strength being a core part of Jason's character. Jessica manages to stab Jason with a not Kandarian dagger, which causes the little MS Paint sparks to fly out, which proves yet again that this movie is a direct rehash of Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. Of course, if the Marvel Cinematic Universe has taught us anything, it's that if you want a shared universe to succeed, you want all your movies to be identical and not take a single step out of formula. Also, by the way, they keep telling Jason to go to hell. And It's cringe. It's really cringe. But it makes me wish for a world where the final nightmare had all the characters telling Freddy, "Be dead, Freddy!" And then comes the eponymous scene of Jason going to hell. A bunch of giant hands made out of mud reach out of the ground and drag him down to hell, and it's a pretty cool scene, I gotta admit. If this wasn't Friday the 13th, and the absolute worst of Friday the 13th, it would be pretty scary in a kind of Hellraiser way. But you also have to ignore the fact that one of the hands grabs Steven and Jessica pulls him away, so Jessica's canonically stronger than Jason and the devil himself. With Jason gone, Steven and Jessica and their baby quite literally walk off into the sunset. Since this is the 90s and not the 2000s, they thankfully don't end the movie with cracking a bunch of jokes about their situation and how happy they are to survive and all that bullshit, which is the bare minimum in a world of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022s. We then see Jason's mask laying in the dirt. It was apparently not dragged to hell with him, even though this movie seems to think it's physically a part of him. And then, in a moment almost exciting enough to actually justify this movie's existence, the iconic bladed glove and striped sweater of Freddy Krueger pop out of the ground and drag his mask back down. This scene was of course meant to set up Sean S. Cunningham's pet project Freddy vs. Jason, which unfortunately wouldn't come out for another 10 years. They really could have called this movie Jason Goes to Development Hell. But hey, these were the olden days when setting up a crossover just meant a single cameo from a single arm instead of 27 post-credit scenes and a TV show on Disney+. And that's Jason Goes to Hell, the final installment. The poster child for if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Friday the 13th Part 6 was a deviation from the older formula, including more action scenes and less of a focus on teens and summer camp. But it actually worked because it held on to what made the first four so iconic. And even though Jason has gone through so many changes, from drowned kid to not drowned kid to maniacal hillbilly to unkillable revenant, his design and character were being narrowed down and perfected, though some might say flanderized, over the many installments. Everything about him in Jason Goes to Hell is a slap in the face to what fans had come to know and love about him, from his terrible makeup to the fucked up mask to his entire existence as a body-swapping incest fetus. He's just not Jason. The nanobot cyborg Uber Jason was a better Jason. In fact, the Jason of Part 5, who literally wasn't Jason, was a better Jason. Obviously no shade at Kane Hodder, who's easily the most iconic actor to play Jason, and also played Freddy Krueger's arm, because I guess Freddy's been hitting the Cenobite gym during his time in hell. But everything about the character in this movie is just so wrong. Jason is the only returning character from the other movies, but he's not the only character who sucks. Steven is irritating and lacking depth. Creighton Duke is easily one of the cringiest characters in the franchise, except maybe the nipple robot from Jason X. He's just so over the top and campy and not in a fun way. The part where he demands Steven let him break his fingers in exchange for info on Jason almost makes him seem like he's got some depth, like he's some kind of sadistic psycho who's the lesser of two evils. But this never really comes up again, and his character just boils down to wacky non sequiturs and long coats. When he finally confronts Jason, he asks if Jason remembers him, which at least implies some connection between the two of them. But again, his whole backstory was cut or never written in the first place, so who knows? Diana, Jessica, and all the rest of the characters were pretty bland. Jessica's boyfriend is also just cringy. It's not enough that he stole Diana's body and he's using it for business purposes. He has to brag about sleeping with her daughter, too? The overbearing diner owner and her simpy husband could have been funny in a funny movie, but they weren't funny in a stupid movie that was trying to be dramatic. Pretty much all the characters sucked. They were more varied and diverse than the classic summer camp characters, but they somehow managed to be even more one-dimensional. That being said, the baby was pretty cute. Jason Goes to Hell, the Final Chance is a movie with very few redeeming qualities. movies. The fact that it was produced by Sean S. Cunningham, who not only directed the original Friday the 13th, but has consistently expressed his hatred of Jason as a character, makes it feel like a genuine slap in the face to longtime fans. Its total lack of familiar subject material makes this feel more like the 2022 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yes, I'm referencing again, I really hate that movie. It's just a bad horror movie, nothing to do with Friday the 13th, with Jason Voorhees copy and pasted into it. At first glance, Jason Goes to Hell: The Final Nerve does seem to have more of a plot than other Friday the 13th movies. But the moment you take a little closer look at the movie, you'll realize that the so-called plot is really just a bunch of people running around making stupid decisions and getting killed. So, just like the other movies, but with worse characters. The final death of Jason Voorhees, while dramatic and admittedly kind of cool, rings just as hollow as the final death of Freddy Krueger in Freddy's Dead. We know they're both coming back for that crossover, that's the whole point of these movies existing. This isn't even like Jason's quote-unquote death in Part 4. They knew they were planning to resurrect him, hence the Freddy cameo, so why make a big deal about finally killing him off? I know Freddy vs. Jason begins with them in hell, but why did both final movies have to end so climactically? I give Jason Goes to Hell: The Final Friday an official Nelson rating of 3 out of 12. Those 3 points are for a couple of decent kills and a few moments that were pretty funny, even if they were out of place in this movie. Adam Marcus gets a few extra points for being an Evil Dead fan, and for inadvertently paving the way for Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, which I would love to make a video about sometime if you guys were up for it. If you want a better Jason Voorhees movie, try literally any other one. Yes, that includes Jason X. And the reboot, which I actually fuck with, even though a lot of people seem to hate it just by definition of being a reboot. If you want a new take on the slasher genre that will not be tied up in legal issues preventing any further installments, check out the Mackenzie Weaver series on my website, natjnelson.com. One of the stories was just adapted into a graphic novel by my uber-talented brother Jonathan, who's got the horror art down. Also, if you want more of these casual movie review videos, or you want to watch my other videos where I attempt to sound smart and philosophical, slash that subscribe button, and maybe the join button, and check out my Patreon for free books and ad-free videos.